Good morning, and welcome to the 15th edition to the Political Mike podcast. I am so pleased to welcome with me a very distinguished and special guest, Professor Allan Lichtman. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and give his introduction. Professor Lichtman, Dr. Allan J. Lichtman, is a professor of history at a professor at history at American University in Washington, D.C. He did his undergraduate studies at Brandeis University and earned his PhD from Harvard University. Professor Lichtman is the recipient of the Scholar Teacher Award from the American University. He was a Sherman Fairchild Distinguished Visiting Scholar at the California Institute of Technology. He is the author and co-author of over six books, including The 13 Keys to the Presidency and The Keys to the White House. The Keys system predicts well ahead of time the outcome of every presidential election since the 1984 presidential election. He is the editor of the book series Studies in Modern American History. Dr. Lichtman has published more than 100 scholarly and popular articles that have appeared in journals and newspapers, including the American Historical Review, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, New Republic, Washington Monthly, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Christian Science Monitor, and the Los Angeles Times. Dr. Lichtman has provided commentary for CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, CNBC, C-SPAN, WorldNet, Voice of America, the BBC, and many other networks worldwide. Professor Lichtman, it's such an honor to have you with me today. So I want to start off, if you can, please, for those who may not be familiar with you, if you could briefly go through your 13 keys that you use to predict the outcome of every presidential election going back to 1984, and if you can reveal what your prediction is for what's going to happen in 14 days, the outcome of this presidential election.
Yes. The 13 keys to the White House are based upon the insight that American presidential elections are votes up or down on the strength and performance of the White House party. In other words, think of this. It's governing, not campaigning, that counts. And the keys look at the big picture of incumbent strength and performance. There are four political keys. The mandate key, based on midterm election results. The party contest key, based on whether there's a major contest for the incumbent party nomination. The incumbency key, whether the sitting president is running. And the third party key, whether there's a third party polling at 10% or more. Two economic keys, the short and long-term economic key. Then there is the policy change key, the social unrest key, the scandal key. Two keys relating to foreign policy, the foreign military failure key, and the foreign military success key. Finally, there are only two keys that have anything to do with the candidates themselves. They ask whether the incumbent party candidate is one of those once-in-a-generation, broadly appealing, charismatic candidates, and whether the challenging party is one of those such candidates. And the way it works, if six or more of these keys go against the party holding the White House, they are predicted losers. In other words, on my system, 6 strikes and you're out. And I've been successfully predicting elections using this system since I predicted Ronald Reagan's reelection in April 1982, 2.5 years ahead of time, and in the midst of what was then the worst recession since the Great Depression. So here's what happened this year. At the end of 2019, Trump was down only 4 keys. Remember, it takes 6 to count him out. Then everything changed in America in 2020. We're hit with the pandemic and the racial justice. After I predicted Trump's win in 2016, he sent me this note written on the copy of the Washington Post where I made my prediction. Professor, congrats, good call, and in big Sharpie letters, Donald J. Trump. Well, he acknowledged my prediction, but he didn't understand that when you're the incumbent, not the challenger, you're judged on your record. And rather than dealing substantively with these issues, he went back and reverted to his 2016 playbook when he was the challenger. The result was that he lost three more keys. The short-term economic key, gauged by an election year recession, the long-term economic key because of the sharply negative growth, and the social unrest key, based on what's raging across the land. So he's now 7 keys down, one more than needed to predict his defeat. So my final prediction that I issued in early August was that Donald Trump would become the first sitting president since Bill Clinton beat George H.W. Bush in 1992 to lose a re-election bid, and Joe Biden would become the next president of the United States. Finally, let me say, never in the history of the United States has the party holding the White House suffered such a sudden and dramatic reversal of fortune in just a few months, and Trump has no one to blame but himself. He's the president.
Thank you, Professor. That's really interesting. And one thing that stuck out to me is that there are 2 keys for foreign policy. I'm curious because since you did come out with your prediction in August, Trump did negotiate a peace deal or a so-called peace deal between Israel and the Gulf state of Bahrain. Now, I'm wondering, does this change anything in your in your analyzation of how this race will play out?
To turn a key, you have to read my book, of course, The Keys to the White House. It's now in its 7th 2020 edition. It's called Predicting the Next President, The Keys to the White House 2020. And it defines how each key has been turned, and it turns each key, gives an answer. Retrospectively, I use the keys all the way back to 1860, the election of Abraham Lincoln. And under the definition of my key, it has to be an extraordinary treaty, one that has a huge impact upon the United States. This treaty barely has made a ripple. It wasn't even mentioned in any of the presidential debates so far. It's not likely to be much of an issue even in the final presidential debate. The only treaty since I've been predicting that I turned the key for was the monumental nuclear arms control treaty between the US and the Soviet Union during Ronald Reagan's second term. I did not turn the key for the 1994 treaty between Israel and Jordan, a much more important country than the Gulf states. So that does not change my call.
So in 2011, President Obama was able to be the sitting president who was giving the direct orders for SEAL Team 6 to take out Osama bin Laden. This was someone who has been on the CIA list for years. He has become a household name because of the fact that he became the face of terrorism and the orchestrator behind the September 11, 2001 attacks. President Trump, early this year, before the national shutdown of COVID-19 took place, issued an airstrike that killed the Iranian general al-Baghdadi, who was a popular general in that country. Do you think, in your view, because I know most likely this was not a significant foreign policy move, but do you think it helped or hurt him in the long run?
Either. It didn't turn a key. As you say, no one heard of this guy. I'll bet you 99 out of 100 Americans could not name him today. Osama bin Laden was public enemy number 1, as you said, a household name, and it was a huge splashy success all over America.
Now, what was also interesting since you last came out with your prediction in August of this year was that President Trump himself contracted the virus, COVID-19, and a lot of folks were saying, this could actually produce a sympathy vote for him, or folks could believe that he's using this as a stunt. And I think it was dangerous that people would not be willing to trust those in the media that the story was legitimate. But that aside, I'm wondering if him having COVID-19 played any role at all in how this election will also play out in 14 days from now.
Here's the beauty of my 13 keys to the White House system. Nothing counts unless it turns a key. Not the debates, not the ads, not the speeches, not the attack strategies, not the dirty tricks, not the polls, and not Trump contracting COVID. It didn't turn a key. It didn't change any of my predictions. And I don't follow the media speculation about who's up and who's down every day. I understand the media has to cover the election day by day, and that's fine. They just can't say, Lichtman predicts Trump's going to lose, see you in 5 months. But I'm not influenced by any of that.
So one political article that came out recently, I think it was yesterday, had indicated that there's some factors that could actually result in a Trump victory. One of which was that Republican registration in key battleground states seems to be increasing. And this seems to be the result of the period when Democratic field operations were going through a hibernation due to the COVID-19 pandemic and all of the necessary protocols that they were trying to go through to ensure that they were not putting others at risk. Does this worry you in any way?
Not really. To step outside the keys for a moment, I mean, the Republican registration did lead the Democratic registration, but not every registered voter votes, and you're talking about 100,000, 200,000, a very small percentage in a big state like Florida or North Carolina. And again, stepping outside the keys, that advantage is offset by the enormous advantage of the Democrats in early voting. Michael McDonald, who runs the United States Election Project, looked at early voting when it comes to states where you register by party. And well over 50% of the early ballots were cast by Democrats, more than Republicans and independents combined, and only a little over 25% were cast by Republicans. And he thinks we could have as many as 80 million or more early votes cast before Election Day, which is going to heavily favor Democrats.
So I was curious because I remember listening to the New York Times video when you did release your prediction, and I was looking forward to it because I've been following you since I think the 2012 election. But one thing that stood out was that you had said that charisma is something that neither candidate has in this election.
Correct.
I'm curious because Biden has been portrayed as the candidate that can empathize with folks who are grieving, folks who seem to be going through a rough time in life, especially during this pandemic when so many people have lost loved ones. Does that not equate at all to any kind of charisma?
Again, you got to stick with the definition of the keys. These are very high threshold keys. We are talking about the once in a generation, truly inspirational, broadly inspirational candidates. Someone like Franklin Roosevelt on the Democratic side or Ronald Reagan on the Republican side. I very rarely have turned this key. Only, fewer than 10 candidates since I've been looking at this, which goes back retrospectively to 1860, 160 years of our politics. And Biden does not fit that definition.
And another point that you had indicated is that Trump only appeals to a small portion of the electorate, which I thought was very interesting because there's a lot of fear going on right now about a secret Trump vote, just like there was in 2016. Now, with all respect, Trump didn't win the popular vote, but do you think that it's possible that there could be a secret Trump vote, a group of people, a large portion of the electorate who may not be revealing right now that they're voting for President Trump, but come election day and come right now during the early voting period, they are casting their votes for him?
Again, my system has nothing to do with the polls. I ignore the polls. I ignore the pundits. It's based on the fundamentals of incumbent party strength and performance. It's based governing, not campaigning. So I'm not basing my system at all on the polls. And I understand that the polls led us astray in 2016, not just the polls, but the compilers of polls like Nate Silver and the Princeton Consortium were misleading us about what was likely to happen. Look, you can see I'm not a very sardonic person, but I took a little bit of sardonic pleasure on election night in watching the pundits twist themselves into pretzels, trying to explain why something happened that they assured us could not possibly happen. And you can imagine my prediction of a Trump win did not make me very popular in 90% plus Democratic Washington, D.C., although I did get that nice note from Donald Trump. So I don't pay any attention to that. And there's certainly no indication, to step outside the keys, of this hidden Trump vote in the early voting, which is, by whatever measure we have, been overwhelmingly favorable to Democrats. And this is an important point. The polls may actually be underestimating Biden's strength, because an early vote is a vote in the hand. A vote on election day is a vote that may or may not happen. Those who tell you they're going to vote on election day, some of them won't. There will be some slippage. There's no slippage in an early vote, provided that it's, there isn't cheating and it's actually counted.
So I remember last year you also predicted that if the Democrats went ahead with the impeachment process, that they would have a stronger chance in November of this year. At the time, the impeachment proceedings did not begin yet. I think the revelation of what took place with the phone call between President Donald Trump and the Ukrainian president was just released, and that formal articles of impeachment were not yet formed yet, or written yet, I'm sorry. Does impeachment still play a role in this election, in your opinion?
Absolutely. It turns one of the keys. Every key is important. You're dealing with 7 keys, just essentially a 2-key difference, because if it was 5, Trump would be a predicted winner. And it's in there. It's my favorite key, the scandal key. And Trump's impeachment, not to mention other scandals, certainly turns that key. He's only the 3rd president in U.S. history to be impeached by the full House. Richard Nixon resigned after the House Judiciary Committee recommended articles of impeachment, never got to the full House. And I turned that key against the 2 other impeached presidents, retrospectively Andrew Johnson in 1868, and prospectively the Democrats in the 2nd Clinton term. And keep in mind, I turned that key against Clinton and the Democrats, even though, quite frankly, his impeachment was not about a major matter. It was about a private, consensual affair, covering it up, far less significant than an attempt to shake down a foreign power, to rig our elections, and to propagate Russian propaganda that it was really Ukraine, not Russia, that intervened on Trump's behalf in 2016.
So this seems to be, well, I think it is the 2nd presidential election without the full protection of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Of course, Shelby versus Holder, the Supreme Court case in 2013, removed that part of Section 5, and under that part, states that had a history of discrimination in terms of voting, their voting laws, had to check in with the Office of the Attorney General before go ahead and issuing that change. Do you think that gerrymandering or voter ID laws or anything else that has been the results of the removal of Section 5 have any effect in how your keys play out?
Look, I've been predicting for nigh on 40 years. And I have to tell you, every 4 years, I still get butterflies in my stomach, even though I'm now 73 years old. And I know the bricks that'll fall on my head if I'm wrong. And one thing that does keep me awake at night, you put your finger on it, is voter suppression, which has become easier as a result of the abrogation of preclearance in 2013. Look, here's what's really going on. The Republican base is old white guys like me. Can't create more old white guys. Unfortunately, you can't make us live to be 150. But Republicans can try to suppress the rising Democratic base of young people like you and minorities. And we see that absolutely blatant and relentless and unprecedented degree this year. Republicans are filing lawsuits all over the country to try to make it harder to vote and harder to count the vote. There's been a lot of poll closings, and they can do that now without having to pre-clear those changes. There are a lot of voter ID laws, which don't have to be pre-cleared anymore. Donald Trump has fiercely and baselessly attacked mail-in voting as ripe with fraud. We know that's not true. He put a mega donor, Louis DeJoy, to head the post office. His appointed board of governors did, who immediately adopted measures to slow down the mail. He claimed they were for economy, but the post office has been bleeding red ink forever. He certainly could have waited till after the election. Trump has called upon intimidators to flood the polls. This is really, really worrisome because my prediction, any prediction, and indeed the health of our democracy depends upon a full and fair vote. I think that'll happen, but as you say, protections have been weakened.
So December of last year, I remember in the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson won. Of course, he was running against a very liberal candidate. And the story in the United States was that this could actually be an indicator of what's to come, being that the United States and the United Kingdom seem to go through the same kind of political phases. Going back to 1979, Margaret Thatcher was in office, and that was around the same time Ronald Reagan was rising to the scene in 1980. Do you think that, and of course, that was before the COVID-19 pandemic really hit the United States. But are there any kinds of implications that the United Kingdom's election of 2019 can have this year?
Not after the pandemic. In 2019, I would have said you may have a point, but we had the pandemic, which turned 2 additional keys against Donald Trump. We had the murder of George Floyd and other young unarmed African Americans, which have led to this call for social and racial justice. So everything changed in 2020, all of it negative for Trump.
Right. So one concern of mine is that no matter what the outcome is in this election, the conspiracies will continue to increase. If Trump, it seems to me, in my opinion, that if Trump loses, they will say that it was an illegitimate win. Biden and the left and the establishment stole the election. They scared folks into not voting. They scared folks about the virus. But if he does win, it seems as if they'll say, well, despite all the odds, he rose and overcame all of the traps and obstacles that the left seemed to put in his way to prevent him from winning. Do you have any kinds of fears about what can happen after November, the day after November 3rd of this year, about what this country will experience in terms of being able to accept the results and the outcome of presidential elections, being that this election seems, because of President Trump, to have such a cloud over it, no matter what the circumstances and the outcome may be?
Well, if I'm right and Joe Biden wins, the Democrats are likely to take back the Senate as well. That's not a guarantee. I don't have a formal system for that. But usually Senate elections, as we saw in 2016, follow the top of the ticket. That would give Democrats unified control over government because they'll obviously keep the House. We haven't seen that for Democrats since the first 2 years of Barack Obama. And that will give Democrats a real opportunity to reverse a lot of the policies of the Republicans on things like immigration, climate change, taxes, and to advance Democratic policies in areas like taxes, education, and infrastructure. So Donald Trump may never accept the results of the election. It doesn't matter. Once the Electoral College votes are counted, and if Biden gets a majority, Trump's out on January 2021, and he's not going to barricade himself in the White House and call on the Proud Boys to defend him. He's a coward. He can't even look people in the eye and fire them. He's got to fire them with tweets or have someone else fire them. And a lot of his base, will object and will believe maybe that they were cheated out of it. But there's not much they can do with Democrats in control of all 3 branches of government. If Donald Trump wins, then I think our country is in real peril. Obviously, Donald Trump wants to be a Vladimir Putin. He wants to be an autocrat. You've seen so many autocratic tendencies. His claiming Article 2 of the Constitution lets him do anything he wants. Of course, false. He's attacked and undermined the free press, an essential component of democracy. He's politicized the Department of Justice and pretty much all of the federal departments and agencies. He has throttled the balance of power, resisting all attempts at congressional oversight. He's used the powers of his office to enrich himself. The other thing that really worries me if Donald Trump is reelected is climate change. He's a climate change denier. He's not only stopped the initiatives of the Obama years to fight climate change, he's throttled them into reverse. And climate change is an existential threat to our survival on this planet. It's not just theoretical. It's here. Our West Coast is burning up. Our Southwest is caught in terrible droughts. Derechos are ravaging the Midwest. Miami's flooding when it's not even raining. Storms are battering the South, and it's only going to get worse. We really need to get a grip on climate change, and we really need to evaluate candidates who are dealing with climate change. If I can give a plug to my wife, Karen Strickler, she runs the only political action committee, a super PAC, dedicated to electing pro-climate change candidates. It's called voteclimatepac.org, the only one dedicated to electing candidates designed to fight climate change. And it's not me who has to worry, it's young people like you, because your future is really in peril. If nothing else, climate change should really start to guide our votes.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Professor, because in conjunction with climate change is also environmental justice. The communities, predominantly poor communities, communities of color who are placed near facilities that emit all kinds of toxic pollutants. I was watching a documentary as part of an environmental law class I'm in. And in the documentary, it went through different states. And in Wisconsin, there's a law that if you have 2,500 animals in your CAFO, concentrated animal feeding operation, you need to be regulated by permit. So what a lot of these industries are doing is that they're having animals, but they're having them at 2,499, just one under the permit, so that they're not mandated to be regulated by a permit or anything like that. And these are the kinds of injustices that need to be addressed, like you mentioned, from the super PAC that your wife is a part of. So I have another question.
Yeah.
Trumpism.
Let me just make one other point. My wife's super PAC also has the nation's only voter guide that will guide you to choosing candidates who will fight climate change. And it's the only voters guide that deals not only with incumbents, but with challengers, and gives you a score for every single candidate. This is critical. Our future depends upon it. Voteclimatepac.org is where you find the voters guide.
And
you're absolutely right. It is communities of color. It is poor people who have always borne the brunt of environmental degradation. Look what happened with the poison water in Flint, Michigan, a heavily minority, very poor community. And as you point out, there were studies showing that kind of tragedy is replicated all over the country. It's not people like Donald Trump who are going to be hurt by climate change. He can move wherever he wants. When the climate change migration occurs, and we're talking maybe tens of millions of people, he can hire private security guards. He can have his own private water supply. It is just the height of hypocrisy that Donald Trump should be a climate change denier and throttling back our efforts to fight climate change. And as voteclimatepac.org's voting guide shows, unfortunately, he's being followed by a lot of enablers in his Republican Party. The Republican Party is really the only group in the world that is dedicated to climate change denial and putting our planet in peril. And let me say one more thing. In 2009, a businessman's letter was written to then President Barack Obama 11 years ago, and it said, unless we take strong action against climate change, the results are going to be catastrophic for our planet and humanity, and the science is irrefutable. You know who signed that letter? Eric Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Ivanka Trump, and Donald Trump Sr. So he knows. This isn't that he's ignorant, but he has made the cynical political calculation that to succeed in Republican politics, he has to deny what he knows and become a climate change denier.
This is fascinating. Trumpism, and when I say Trumpism, I mean the fact that, to me, it's amazing that even with Trump, according to your keys especially, seems to be going in the wrong direction in addressing this virus, he still seems to be within a cheating distance. And that to me is amazing. And I'm wondering if Trumpism, the fact that you can support a candidate with complete loyalty, with disregard to facts, with disregard to science, with disregard to what experts in medical fields are saying, despite the fact that death tolls seem to be rising, do you think that that will have a long-lasting impact long after the 2020 election comes and goes? And also the kind of intermingling between the three branches of government. The fact that he blatantly said that he wants Judge Amy Coney Barrett to sit on the Supreme Court to kind of replicate what we saw in 2000 when the Supreme Court hands the presidency to the Republican nominee. Do you think that these factors would have any kind of long-term negative consequences for the country? And if so, what are they?
I think so. Look, Trump has this fervent base of support, in my view, because there is a substantial segment of the American population who is worried that their country is changing in ways they don't like. What is the most shrinking part of the electorate? Non-Hispanic whites. Gone down from 76% in 2000 to 67% today. We are rapidly becoming a majority minority country. That's going to be a reality in 20 to 25 years. As the poet said, birth, copulation, death. That's all there is when it comes down to brass tacks. And these brass tacks of demography are changing our country. And you're not going to stop them, but Trump represents, when he says, let's make America great again, he really means, let's stop these trends towards a more multicultural society. And let's go back when white Americans ran everything. Well, that's not going to happen. As I said, you can't fight birth rates. But there's a lot of Americans who want to do that. That's a losing proposition in the long run for Republicans, because you can't win anymore on your white non-Hispanic base, but it is going to cause a lot of churning and a lot of tension within our society for a very long time. Plus, look at the Republican Party. Trump has trashed everything the Republican Party has professed to stand for. Personal morality, personal responsibility, a joke under Donald Trump. He has no morality, takes responsibility for nothing. States' rights, limited government, fiscal responsibility, respect for traditional American institutions, all gone under Donald Trump. That's why you see the Republican Party being such enablers of Trump, because that's what they have left. And they're going to have a big reckoning if I'm right and Trump loses. And we've already seen a lot of principled Republicans, like those involved in the Lincoln Project, and a number of former high-level Trump administration officials calling out Trump and the autocratic, anti-democratic, misogynist, racist appeal that he represents. But unfortunately, there's still a pretty big segment of the electorate to whom that resonates. It's going to decline in the future, but it's here right now.
And Professor, it seems, because in recent days, Senator Ben Sasse, I guess a recording came out that I don't know if it was intended to be revealed or leaked, but it was. And in the recording, he just outlines how he seems to be at a loss for words at how evangelicals could be placing their support behind the president when he seems to be talking about them privately in a negative way. The fact that he seems to be contradicting experts like Dr. Fauci, the head of the CDC, Dr. Redfield, and other experts who are not political people, but they are put there for the goal, for the task of ensuring that the welfare of the American people is ensured. And then you have John Cornyn, who seems to be also distancing himself from the president, even though he has a 95% voting record of voting in alignment with the president, because he's in election now against MJ Hagar, a veteran. He seems to be trying to create some kind of contrast between him and the president. Do you see that, regardless of whether Trump wins this year or whether he leaves the office in 2025, do you see the Republican Party returning to the days of Reagan ideas, trying to rebrand themselves, regardless of the outcome that happens in 14 days?
Look, I have no respect for those Republicans who, when faced with electoral challenges, are suddenly, after enabling Trump for over 3.5 years, suddenly speaking out. I have no respect for them whatsoever. They're not acting on principle. They're acting on naked self-interest. They should have been challenging Trump if they were persons of principle all along. I do think, as I said, the Republican Party especially if Trump loses and I'm right, will have a huge reckoning to do. How are they going to rebrand themselves? Uh, Reagan offers some lessons, but America in the 1980s is not America in, the third decade of the 21st century. And the one thing, the huge issue that they're going to have to face is how in the world are we going to respond to the changing demography of this country to appeal to young people, to minorities, to women, while at the same time hanging on to our fervent followers who are fearful of these changes that are sweeping across the nation.
And one thing that I think we didn't talk about was the influence of foreign interference with this election. Russia, I believe China. Trump also quickly says that China is heavily wanting Biden to win, according to him. Meanwhile, he doesn't seem to be addressing Russia. Regardless, do you think that foreign intervention, deepfake videos, Facebook ads, and all kinds of fake accounts, robots, do you think that that will end once Trump leaves office, or do you think that will continue going down the road in future presidential elections?
One thing, along with voter suppression, that keeps me up at night is Russian intervention. Trump is a master at distraction and deflection. He's trying to deflect to China. There's no evidence that China is actually actively interfering in our election. There is ample evidence that, as in 2016, Russia is interfering in a sweeping and systematic way, guided by Vladimir Putin and the Russian intelligence services. We just had a number of Russians indicted for illegal hacking, not necessarily into the election, but it just shows how active their interference operation really is within the Russian intelligence services. And as in 2016, we see Donald Trump welcoming and exploiting Russian intervention. We see Rudy Giuliani, his personal lawyer, who orchestrated this incredible bogus smear of Ambassador Yanukovych in Ukraine, destroying her career. And now we see him spreading more Russian disinformation about the Bidens. And unfortunately, Donald Trump is propagating it, and people are going to believe it. And, if Donald Trump wins, it's going to become a staple of our politics. And if Donald Trump loses, then, and assuming Democrats gain unified control of government, there are a number of really important things that they can do to blunt this. Just to name a few, they need to pass a law saying anytime any candidate for any office is approached by foreign nationals, they need immediately to report it to the FBI. Not a single approach by foreign nationals in 2016 or this year with respect to the Trump campaign has ever been reported to the FBI. We need to greatly strengthen our election technology. This is going to require federal direction and federal money. We need to take strong countermeasures to make Russia pay for its interference in our elections.
And Professor, this is my last question before I let you go. What advice do you have, or any kinds of words of wisdom do you have for someone who may be watching, who's a young person who may be discouraged by government at this point? They've, over the past 3.5 years, we've seen so much under this presidency. We've seen so much coupled with the social unrest that you had talked about. And now it seems like the Supreme Court's now going to have a 6-3 conservative tilt. A lot of major Supreme Court cases are going to be on the line, including the Affordable Care Act. What is your advice to them? Why should they still have hope in government? And even if neither candidate is their ideal choice, for those who may have wanted a more progressive candidate like Senator Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, or maybe even a younger candidate like Pete Buttigieg, what do you have to say to them as to why they have to get involved and why they can't give up now?
I concluded my New York Times video when I predicted Donald Trump's loss with a quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln. The best way to predict your future is to choose it. And the young people of America, the people who are appalled by what's been going on in the last 3.5 years plus, have a way to choose their future, and that is to vote. Don't be cynical about your vote. You know, the candidates may not be your ideal, but the choice could not be clearer in this election. And as an historian, I would also provide some positive feedback to young people and others worried about our society. We have come back before. We came back from the War of 1812, when Washington was burned. We came back from the Civil War. We came back from Jim Crow. We came back from the Great Depression and World War II. We came back from 9/11. The country is resilient. There can be a better future, but you've got to choose it by voting, and vote early. Vote soon. Don't wait to the last minute if you want your ballot counted.
Professor Allan Lichtman, thank you so much for joining me on the Political Mic. This was an amazing discussion. I really enjoyed it. For those who want to hear more, I would encourage you to go and order the 13 Keys to the White House book. You won't regret it. Professor Lichtman, it's such an honor and a pleasure to have you on and to discuss politics with you. I hope to keep in touch with you, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you. Best to you, and you know where to find me, and send me a link.
I will. All right. Thank you, sir.